Okay. Well, tonight we'll continue with a town that you may not have heard. It's not probably one of the most recognizable towns, but it does have some cool history. And I'm going to show you some pictures here. This is called Beth Shan. Beth Shan is a town. As I get into what we're going to talk about tonight, I'll show you and how what the significance of this city. But first of all, I've received an email from Mike Tomberlin, and he sent a quotation. He sends out these Monday morning emails, and it says, "The Bible is a one-time revelation given for all time, and at every age it instructs. It is never old, it is never out of style. It has something that pertains unto life and godliness, no matter the generation that is reading it. And out of this one-time revelation come implications and applications for every person, in every church, in every generation, in every time." In other words, the Bible is godly revelation, and where God's revelation exists, there is absolute authority to direct. And I thought about that because we're doing so much, basically everything I teach is, well, I should say, excuse me, I shouldn't say it's all out of the Old Testament. We are into the end of the Old Testament, I guess, which is the Gospels. We consider that Old Testament. Some call it New. But we're taking things from the ancient times, and we're bringing them into how they apply in current affairs and things that we do today. And that's, as we go through the teachings tonight, I'll try to point out some stuff from time to time, but think about what we're seeing in these people, these characters of the Old Testament, and what can we learn from them? What can I apply? We're going to be getting into King Saul, and we're going to see some of his characteristics and some of his downfalls as a leader, and pitfalls that anybody can fall into without being diligent and aware, and see some of the things he did and why his kingdom, his kingship went into ruin, and things that could have been avoided, but he made some bad choices. But so kind of think about those things. That's what we get out of expository teachings. They're basically just reading the word and explaining some background, some things here and there about it, and then seeing how we can apply it. So let's talk a little bit, and let me show you a picture here of where this particular town is. I'm going to share here. Let me see. I don't see it right now. Hang on. Okay, there it is. All right. I don't have a Gary behind the scenes to do this for me, which is fine. Or is it Rob that helps out, John Shainheit? But this works out really good. I'm starting to get the hang of this, and since you guys are patient, we get through this just fine. So here's a map of Israel that I've shown you this map on a number of occasions, and I want to show you where this Beer Shean is. It's right here. We've got the Sea of Galilee up here, the Jordan River, the Dead Sea down at the bottom, and as you can see, it is to the west of the Jordan. It's very near the Jezreel Valley, and that's where this particular town is located. And it has a name change as the centuries went by. The name did change. It is one of the cities in the Decapolis. You probably heard to the Decapolis being referred to in the New Testament. The Decapolis was actually a group of several cities. I think at one time it was 10. I don't know if it ended up being 10, but there's a bunch of cities. They're mostly Gentile cities, and a lot of them were to the east of the Jordan River. And there's no record that the word that Jesus Christ witnessed or traveled in there, but there are records that people from the Decapolis came to hear him. It was, so let me show you another picture here. This is the architectural remains of Beersheba, and it's in it also there is it became named Synthopolis. Now this is technically Synthopolis down here, and this is a Greco-Roman city. Actually, it's much older than that, but this is when it was really developed. And you can see some of the columns that are remaining here in a main walkway. I'm going to show you an amphitheater here in a moment, but technically Beth-Shan was here on this mountaintop. It was called Tel Beth-Shan. And some of our people that went with us, actually, if you can, this is kind of blurry, but this is a stairway. And you could walk all the way up it, and then you can see some of the ruins of the older part of this particular city of Beth-Shan. It had some Egyptian influence and other influences. And of course, the Greeks and Romans influenced us. This is a model of the city. It had a hippodrome, which means they had horse races. It had an amphitheater right here. So it was a pretty modern city with a lot of buildings. Much of that was done after Alexander the Great captured it back in around 332. And then later the Romans were involved. And of course, the Romans liked their games, which are always bloody games. Here in this amphitheater, you can see the remains of it. It's, you know how amphitheaters are, and they have a stage here. Oftentimes they would do plays, and it was common that if it was there was a murder or anything in the play, is actually literally done in the play. Also was done for gladiators, which always resulted in death. So it was the kind of the Roman entertainment of the day. Now you can see the columns that I pointed out before. There they are on this side of the main, and there's the tell of the old city up there in the stairway. Here's another picture of the amphitheater. It's kind of funny when we walked through the amphitheater. Right when we first walked in, they had public restrooms, and we've talked about how the public restrooms work in previous teachings. But they also had what they called, now this might be a new one for you, a vomitorium. Yes, a vomitorium. They would celebrate, they would gorge themselves with food, and then they would get rid of it in their vomitoriums so they could eat more. Kind of a bizarre behavior back then. And I think it's still carried on today to some degree. Here they have plenty of baths. This is some of the well-preserved areas where they had pools. The Romans the Greeks enjoyed their pools, their special outdoor public rooms. This is the remains of a heated public bath. Now, this is what would be underneath the floor. So you have to just kind of imagine the floor being on top of this. And this is what supported the floor. And then the hot water would run, and the steam from the hot water would run and fill this area and flow out. And however they circulated it, they had heating areas, and the water moved in and they kept it hot. So the baths were kept very comfortable. And so you can see some of these remains. This is some of the better remains. Now they had some really nice mosaics. I don't know if I missed them, but I didn't get any photos of the mosaics. But they did the really fancy mosaics where they take tiny pieces of stone, colored stone, and they make beautiful mosaics out of them. Here's some more of the public baths. And I think this is the public restroom. I could be wrong on that, but there's some remains there, and that picture we'll deal with later. But that gives you an idea of what it looks like today. And so, I'll stop sharing for just a moment. So it ends up that during the time of the King Saul, the Philistines controlled this particular city. The Philistines or ruled this. Now, it had been given to Manasseh back in the time of Joshua, but Manasseh, they were never able to expel the Philistines out of this town. It took King David to do that, as he often did. He came up and finished the job that other predecessors did not. He did a great job of it. But at the time of King Saul, it was run by and controlled by the Philistines. Now, I'm going to take you into the word here so we can get some background. And we're going to see some things that occurred during King Saul's life. And the reason why this city is important is because when King Saul was killed, we're going to do some background, some backstory work. But when King Saul was killed, when the Philistines defeated him at Mount Gilboa, he was beheaded and his body was brought to Bethshan, and it was hung on the wall for all to see. So that's how this city is probably one of the most it's its notoriety is basically from this. There is a bunch of other stuff, but nothing as probably as startling as that. So we're going to get into King Saul tonight, and I'm sure you've read things about it, but we're going to go through a few different records and look at some of the things that he did. One of the things that caused his demise was his disobedience and how he dealt with disobedience. A lot of people can be disobedient. We know, anybody who's read King David's story, every page he does something wrong, and then it seems, and then there are consequences, but he always had a repentant heart, and he always came back to God all the time. When he was confronted by the prophet Nathan and he did horrendous things, adultery, but Bathsheba murdered her husband. My gosh. He took a census when God said not to. 15,000 men died over that. I mean, this guy would have had trouble sleeping at night, I would think. But the thing is that God would forgive him. He had a repentant heart, and he would get into it, and he would come back to God, and he was a wonderful person, where God even said he was a man over his own heart. Well, Saul was a different story. Now, Saul ruled for 40 years, but in the first part of his reign, did good. He did good. So let's look into some of Saul's disobedience and how he dealt with stuff. A lot of things, what you'll see in Paul's life is he's a fearful person, and you'll see jealousy in his life, selfishness, pride, and blame seem to be abundant. And let's go take a look at one of the first things he did. If you'll take a look at 1 Samuel 10, we'll go into 1 Samuel 10. Let's see. 1 Samuel 10 and in verse 7. Okay, this is Samuel speaking to Saul. And let it be that when these signs have come to pass, that you do whatever your hand finds to do, because God is with you. The Spirit of God was on Samuel. And so he instructs Samuel to go down before me to Gilgal. And behold, I will come down to you to offer burnt offerings and to do sacrifices and and peace offerings, and you are to wait 7 days until I come to you and show you what you are to do. So very clear instructions. He tells King Saul to go to Gilgal, And then he says he's going to come. This will be Samuel. And then when he gets there, he's going to do his offerings. And he tells King Saul to wait 7 days until he comes. And then he's going to show very simple instructions. Now let's see what Saul did. Flip over about 3 chapters here to Samuel 13. And if you look down into verse 8. Okay. And he waited. So this is King Saul. He waited 7 days according to the time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. So here we are on the 7th day, and he hasn't showed up yet. Then Saul said, bring here to me the burnt offering and the peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. So that was not the instruction. He was not being obedient. And he got fearful because he saw the people were scattering from him, right? They're starting to go away. They weren't staying together. He's getting nervous. And he does things that a king doesn't do. That was the prophet's job in this situation. But as soon as he had finished in verse 10, finished the burnt offering, behold, guess who shows up? Samuel. This is on the 7th day of the 7th days he was supposed to wait. And Saul went out to meet him to bless him and greet him. But Samuel said, what have you done? And Saul said, because I saw the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come during the appointed days, which he did, and the Philistines were assembling themselves together at Michmash. So I said, now the Philistines will come down against me in Gilgal, and I'm not asked to favor Yahweh. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. So if you were talking to a counselor today, they'd probably say, this sounds like blame shifting in denial. And so that's what Saul did. And you're going to see him do this. And Samuel said to Saul in the next verse, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of Yahweh your God that he commanded you. If you had, Yahweh would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. So here's one record of Samuel not doing what he's supposed to do. Let's take a look at Samuel 15. And this is going to be a record that you're all familiar with. And Samuel in verse 1, and Samuel said to Saul, Yahweh sent me to anoint you to be king over his people, over Israel. So now listen to the voice of the words of Yahweh. This is what Yahweh of armies says. I will punish what Amalek did to Israel, how he set himself against him on the way when he came out of Egypt. So when the children of Israel coming out of Egypt, Amalek was not good. If you check the record, he didn't want them to go through his property. He offered them no sustenance, made them go around, and then actually pursued them and attacked them. So now God says, now Amalek, again, we're dealing with these evil people that showed up after the flood. We've talked about on a number of occasions. And there'll be scriptural documentation, which, I won't go into that tonight, but now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man, woman, infant, nursing baby, ox, sheep, camel, and donkey. Pretty serious deal to do, but that's what needed to be done. So Saul summoned the people and counted them, and he had 20,000 foot soldiers, 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the valley. And Saul said to the Kenites, depart, go down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them, for you showed kindness to all the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites, and Saul struck down the Amalekites from Havilah as far as where you come to Shur, which is next to Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, but he devoted to destruction all the people with the mouth of the sword. So He made an exception here. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and not only that, the best of the sheep and the cattle and the fatlings and the lambs and all that was good, and did not devote them to destruction. But all the property that was contemptible and worthless, they devoted to destruction. Then the word of Yahweh came to Samuel, saying, I regret I have made Saul to be king, for he has turned his back from following me and has not fulfilled my words. Samuel was angry and he cried out to Yahweh all night. And Samuel rose early to meet Saul in the morning, and it was told to Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set a monument for himself. That was nice. A monument for himself. He turned and passed on and went down to Gilgal. So that he had a lot of self-interest. You know, we already seen the pride that he showed, and the fear of the people. And now he shows some selfishness. He's self-honoring. He sets his monument up, and he turned and passed and went down to Gilgal. Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, You are blessed of Yahweh. I have fulfilled the word of Yahweh. What about Agag? What about all this livestock? So basically, this is not honest. I mean, I fulfilled the word of Yahweh. He knew what they were. He didn't do it. But Samuel said, Then what is the sound of sheep in my ears and the sound of cattle I hear? And Saul said, Well, they have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to Yahweh your God. We've devoted the rest to destruction. See? So now he's doing blaming again. He's denial. He's acting like he didn't do anything wrong. He's playing, hey, I did fulfill the word of Yahweh, did everything you said, and it's just not true. Verse 16, then Samuel said to Saul, Stop. Let me tell you what Yahweh said to me last night. So he said to him, Speak. And Samuel said, Though you were little in your own eyes, were you not made the head of the tribes of Israel? Yahweh anointed you king over Israel. And Yahweh sent you on a mission and said, Go and devote to destruction the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. So why did you not obey the voice of Yahweh, but swooped down upon the spoils and did what was evil in the eyes of Yahweh? But Saul said to Samuel, But I have obeyed the voice of Yahweh. Denial. And I have gone on the mission that Yahweh sent me on, and have brought Agag, the king of Amalekites, and have devoted the Amalekites to destruction. But the people took of the spoil, sheep and cattle, the best of the devoted things, to sacrifice to Yahweh your God. In Gilgal, see, they kept them just to sacrifice, trying to make something wrong look right. It shows bad character. And same thing that we can do and avoid today. You know, we talk about this often, that people, we make mistakes. We ask to do things, and sometimes we don't do them. We make commitments and then we don't fulfill them. And we just make mistakes. We hurt people. You know, we have all experienced these different kinds of things. And this is what you don't do. You don't blame it on somebody else. You don't try to and you don't lie about it. You know, he even did some gaslighting. I have fulfilled the words of Yahweh, trying to convince God that he did what he was supposed to do when he didn't. You know, I wasn't being hurtful to you. You know, I didn't mean it. You know, you've heard these kinds of things. So this is a good lesson for us on not to be, you know, King Saul is an excellent example of being a bad example. So, but Samuel said, has Yahweh, but Samuel says, has Yahweh as much delight in burnt offerings as sacrificing as in obeying the voice of Yahweh? Do you remember King David saying that in one of the Psalms? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, to listen than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and stubbornness is as wickedness and terrapin. Because you have rejected the word of Yahweh, he has rejected you from being king. Verse 24. Then Saul said to Samuel, now watch this. I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of Yahweh in your words because, and then here's his excuse, because I was afraid of the people and obeyed their voice. This is another good lesson. If you ever apologize to someone, if you ever own up to a sin and you instantly follow up for the reason you did it, it negates the apology. It's saying, but I was justified in what I did. So it's like they never apologized. Next verse. So now, please forgive my sin and return with me that I can bow down before Yahweh. But Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of Yahweh. So Yahweh has rejected you from being king over Israel. And Samuel turned to go, but Saul grabbed the edge of his cloak and tore it. And Samuel said to him, Yahweh has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you. And we know who that is. King David. 29. Also, the eternal one of Israel does not lie or change his mind, for he is not a human being who changes his mind. And then he said, this is Saul saying, I have sinned. But then watch this. Yet please honor me now before the elders of the people. Absolutely amazing. Is that repentant to God? I have sinned. I'm so sorry. I've sinned to you, God. I did not obey. He acknowledges the sin, but his main concern is what the people are going to think about it. But please honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel, and return with me so that I can bow down before Yahweh your God. So Samuel went back with Saul, and Saul bowed down before Yahweh. And then the rest of the story is that Samuel fulfills the rest of what needed to be done. He kills King Agag and takes care of business, the stuff that Samuel didn't do. So Samuel had a history of disobedience. Then let's take a look at Samuel 18, verse 10. The history goes on. And in verse 10 of Samuel 18, it came to pass on the next day that an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul. And I think most of you know, I think you all know, that in the Hebrew scriptures, God was the sovereign God, the God who took responsibility for evil. Good or bad, it was laid upon him. He chose not to expose the adversary for his reasons. You remember in Job, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. And here an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul is how they looked at it. That's how God set it up. It wasn't until Jesus Christ where he exposed the adversary and the true nature of God, and he exposed what the adversary was doing. And that's when that was in that era where we were beginning to move into the church era, where we had spirit upon us and in us rather, and we're powerful and could deal with some of these spiritual things. And then as the phrase goes on, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. David was playing his harp with his hand, and he did as he did day by day. And Saul had a spear in his hand, and Saul threw the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped from his presence twice. And Saul was afraid, here again, afraid of David because Yahweh was with him and departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander over thousands. And he went out and came in before the people. And David was successful in all of his activities because Yahweh was with him. And so we find out that they went out and, they went out to battle, but you can see fear, you can see jealousy creeping up, and not to mention becoming demonized, where he actually wanted to murder who would be the man who would be taking his place. So now let's move on to verse 28, 29 down here. Scroll down a little bit. Saul saw and knew that Yahweh was with David, and Micah, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul became even more afraid of David, and Saul was hostile. That's another sinful behavior for David continually. And he got real jealous because of different things that he requested David to do. He did it. And then there were a time when people sang about the what David had done, and he got very jealous about it. So was Saul disobedient? Yes, he certainly was. And so now we're going to get into a record here about the demise of Saul. And we're going to need to turn to Samuel 28. If you'll turn to Samuel 28, this will be 2 Samuel 28, verse 3. And I'm going to have to turn on a light. The sun is going down here, and I need a little more light to see my notes. Whoops, I don't think I did that right. Second Samuel. Here, I'll just a minute. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Okay, we're going to go to 2 Samuel 28. Well, that can't be right. I'm sorry, 1 Samuel 28. Okay, thank you. I'll get it here. Now, okay, now we're going through a record here where it says in verse 3, now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah in his own city. And Saul had removed from the land those who inquired of spirits or had familiar spirits. And that was a good thing, because that's what God wanted them to do. Let's take a look in Deuteronomy chapter 18. And in verse 9, when you have come to the land that Yahweh your God is giving you, you are to not to learn to do the abominable things that the nations do. There is not to be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter to pass through fire. And we've seen that these kings did this in the Old Testament. The sons, Hezekiah's father did that. Hezekiah's brother was sacrificed in fire, and others. And also who practices divination, who tells fortunes, fortune tellers, or interprets omens, or practices sorcery, or one who casts spells. You hear about these things going on today. Or one who inquires of spirits or of a familiar spirit. So one who inquires, speaks to spirits or a familiar spirit. And that would be a spirit familiar to whoever they're they're inquiring. Or a necromancer. For whoever does these things is an abomination to Yahweh. And because of these abominations, Yahweh your God will drive them out before you. You must be blameless before Yahweh your God. For those nations that you dispossess, listen to those who practice sorcery or diviners. But as for you, Yahweh your God does not allow you to do so. Let's take a look at Leviticus 20. And in verse 6, the person who turns to those who are mediums and to those who have familiar spirits to prostitute themselves after them, I will set my face against that person and will cut him off from among his people. So pretty clear, and there's more. I mean, I could go through quite a few. Let's take a look at Deuteronomy 18. This will be the last area on that. Deuteronomy 18 and in verse 9. When you have come into the land that Yahweh your God is giving you, you are not to learn to do the abominable things that those nations do. Verse 10, there is not to be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter to pass through the fire, who practices divination, who tells fortunes or interprets omens or practices sorcery, or one who casts spells, or one who inquires of spirits, or a familiar spirit or necromancer. Well, I already read that one, sorry. But that just tells you what God thinks about it. The palm readers and the casting of spells, and God is totally against that. And there's only two spirit beings or two spirit forces. We have the true God and his spiritual forces, and we have the adversary and his spiritual forces. So things that are spiritual come from one or the other of those two. So Leviticus, we've already done that. So good. We got these down. All right, let's go into 1 Samuel 28. So it's pretty clear what God thinks of these types of people, about mediums and about those who inquire of spirits. He told Israel not to do that and to get rid of them. So in 1 Samuel 28 and verse 3, we'll go back to that. We just read verse 3. And then in verse 4, the Philistines gathered themselves together and came and encamped at Shunem. And Saul gathered all of Israel together, and they encamped at Mount Gilboa. And I'm going to take a moment here and show you where that is. And that's right here. Mount Gilboa is, we looked where, so it's just a little bit north of where the city of Bethshan is. So there's Mount Gilboa, and that's where they're encamped. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul asked about Yahweh, Yahweh did not answer him. Now, you'll notice the word asked. He asked of Yahweh. We're going to see a different usage of this kind of word later. Yahweh did not answer him, not by dreams, nor by Urim, which is a stone on the priest's breastplate, nor by prophets. God's prophets were not talking to him. He didn't get any dreams. Yahweh did not speak to him. And for what reasons? We just read a bunch of them. He was disobedient. He did not follow what God asked him to do, and God is taking the kingdom away from him to give it to another who is better in him. It said that we just read that record. So there he is. He's in a bad way. He's got the Philistines who have a mighty army. He's got Israel, and he's got not sure what he's supposed to do. He's been demonized. He's tried to kill David. He's tried to even kill John. Jonathan, his son, he even tried to kill his own son because he was friends with David. And Saul asked of Yahweh, and we just read what he got. And then Saul said to his servant, seek out me a woman who possesses a familiar spirit. This is just blatant disobedience. That I may go to her and inquire. Up here, he asked Yahweh. Here, he's going to inquire. Showing us a lot more earnestness. It's a more powerful word. his servant said, well, behold, there's a woman who has a familiar spirit in Endor. Now, Endor is just north of where he is. But the problem is the Philistines are between him and Endor. You know, Saul was supposed to kill all the people who were, drive them out of the land, kill them. But he did not do a good job because there was one in Endor and his servants knew about it. So in verse 8, Saul disguised himself and put on different clothing, and he went, he and 2 men with him. Now, this is quite a trek. They're going to go all the way from where they're camped there near Mount Gilboa all the way to Endor, and the Philistine army is in between them. This man is committed to see this particular person who has this familiar spirit, and he's desperate. He's up against this huge army, and he doesn't know what to do, and he's blown it over and over again, and God's not talking to him. The prophets aren't talking to him. And they came to the woman at night. So this was a long trek. And he said, he speaks to her and says, now he put on the different clothing. He took off his royal robes, you know. He made it look like he wasn't the king. So he looked like a regular person. And so he shows up and he says, please divine for me by the familiar spirit and bring up for me the one that I say to you. It's interesting. He's really off the ball, but one unique thing is, which was the belief at the time, that when people were dead, they went to grave them. And so that was in the ground. And so he's asking to bring him up. But we also know from other records that you're not supposed to pray to the dead or try to contact the dead because the dead are dead. There's nothing going on in Graydon. There's just an absence of any awareness, an absence of anything. But he was determined to do this. And he was already demonized. And so he goes to a woman with a demon to get advice. And the woman said to him, behold, you know what Saul has done. He has removed from the land those who inquire spirits or have familiar spirits. So why do you lay a snare for my life to cause me to die? Don't you know I can't do this. I could be killed for it. And then Saul swore to her by Yahweh, saying, as Yahweh lives, no punishment will happen to you for this thing. Now, only the king could make such a statement. And she's not picking up on that at this time. She just passes over it. And then the woman said, who do you want me to bring up for you? And he says, bring up Samuel for me. So here we go. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out in a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. It's interesting that when she starts contacting the devil, the demons, that they all of a sudden, it's like they gave her a cue or revelation of who she was working with, because she didn't know that until then. Verse 13, but the king said to her, do not be afraid. What did you see? And the woman said to Saul, I saw gods coming up out of the earth. And so it's interesting that they use gods. And the gods are oftentimes used for powerful people, you know. You can check the Bible. There's lots of records where people are called gods, spirits are called gods. And so she saw gods coming up out of the earth. So she sees a group. She sees these powerful demons, individuals coming out of the earth. And then he said to her, what is his appearance? And she said, well, an old man is coming up covered in a cloak. Well, that kind of makes sense. You know, and that makes sense to Saul because Samuel was an old man. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the whole scheme of things, because if this was a man living an afterlife, would you think he'd still be an old man? You know, like would a infant still be an infant that died? So you can see some flawed thinking going on here, but that's what he thought. And so that's how this is going to go. And Saul knew that it was Samuel. He was deceived. The adversary fooled him and fooled this this woman of Endor. And and Saul kneeled down with his face to the ground. And Samuel said to Saul, so now the devil spirit is going to speak to Saul. Now, how he does it doesn't say exactly. It could be through the woman, the medium. It could be through other ways. Sometimes spirits will change the voice of the person they're occupying. And the voice that came to him said, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Well, that's a very interesting statement. You know, it kind of he's pushing Saul is pretty vulnerable now, and he's kind of pushing him back, being pretty aggressive, you know, saying, you've disturbed me, you know, by bringing them up. And Saul answered, I'm exceedingly distressed, for the Philistines are making war against me, and God has turned away from me and no longer answers me, nor by prophets, nor by dreams. Well, why would Saul think if no prophet's going to speak to Saul, why on earth would Samuel speak to him? There's a little problem with the logic there. You know, if no prophet's going to talk, then Samuel wouldn't either. So I called you to make known to me what I should do. So the adversary is taking full advantage of the situation that King Saul is in. He's vulnerable. He's got this huge army that's about ready to take him out in Israel. God doesn't talk to him, and the prophets won't talk to him. So he has this idea that if they can conjure up Samuel, he'll talk to him, even though none of the other prophets will talk to him. So the adversary takes full advantage of his vulnerability. In verse 16, then Samuel said, so why do you ask me, since Yahweh has turned away from you and has become your foe? This is interesting, you know, that what the demon is going to say is going to be combination of truth, going to become an error, it's going to become misleading and misguiding. The next verse, Yahweh has done to you as he spoke by my hand. Wow. Yahweh has torn the kingdom out of your hand and has given it to your neighbor, even David. Is that a true statement? Yes, it is. That's a true statement. Verse 18, because you did not obey the voice of Yahweh and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalekah, therefore Yahweh has done this thing to you this day. Now, this is kind of interesting. Therefore, Yahweh has done this thing to you today. What is this thing? So, you know, being vague like that, especially when you got somebody who's in the state that Saul is, you can just imagine what he could think. You know, he's thinking all these negative things. So without specifying anything, he made a situation even turn more negative towards Saul. In verse 19, and Yahweh will give Israel as well as you to the hand of the Philistines. And tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Yahweh also will give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. Well, it's pretty obvious when you're up against a huge, it's pretty obvious when you're up against a huge army like what we were seeing, or like he was seeing. You can see that, wow, you know, I'm going to lose. The adversary could see that. I mean, this is no magnificent spiritual insight when this demon who's impersonating Samuel the prophet, when he's telling him what's going to happen, of course, you're in a battle. You have not done what you're going to do. If you proceed with this battle, this is what's going to happen. You're going to be destroyed. So what's interesting here is that he's speaking something that, in other words, I'm showing you that the adversary does not have foreknowledge. He can predict the future like any other person who's very astute and noticing, and he can see the position that Saul's in, and he knows this is a losing battle, so he just states the obvious. But Saul just thinks, oh, this is the real deal, and now I am doomed. Now, there was Saul could have made some good decisions here, but he chose not to. So back into the scriptures here, and he gives this awful, awful thing. So immediately, the next verse, immediately Saul fell full length on the ground and was exceedingly afraid because of the words of Samuel, and there was no strength left in him to eat food all day or all night. But eventually, I won't read all of that stuff, but he does end up eating and he goes back. And now we're going to see the next record here. So let's see here. I want to go to 1 Samuel 31. So just a few chapters down in verse 31. So he's gotten back, you know, he went to see the medium there in Endor. Now he's back, and we're in 1 Samuel chapter 31, verse 1. And now the Philistines fought against Israel. You see, he didn't have to go through it. That's a thing where he could have retreated. He was up against this huge army. Why didn't he just, hey, we're going to go back. We'll come back and fight another day. You know, he could have repented. He could have said, hey, no, I have been really wrong. I have just done evil in the sight of the Lord. He could have done a heartfelt repentance. He could have, you know, put on sackcloth. He could have got more men from other places, mercenaries, to help him. But no, what does he do? He fights a war that he's going to lose. That does not show any wisdom. Even in his sorry situation, he could have made a much better decision. So the adversary fooled him, took advantage of him, and Saul fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And even at the very end, he could have changed it and made a better outcome, but he didn't. So they fought against Israel. The men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistine overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed his sons. Jonathan, that wonderful man who was so close to David, their hearts were just so close and they had such a wonderful friendship, dead. Abinadab and Malchishua, sons of Saul. And the battle was heavy around Saul, and the shooters and the men of the bow found him, and he was severely wounded by the archers. And Saul said to his armor bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and torture me. But his armor bearer would not do it. He was terrified. So Saul took the sword and fell on it. He killed himself. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell on the sword too and died with him. So Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor bearer, and all his men that same day together. What a sad, sad story. Let's continue here. And when the men of Israel were on the other side of the valley, and those that were beyond the Jordan saw the men of Israel fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and settled in them. And on the next day, in verse 7, it came to pass while the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons. You know, they didn't know for sure that he was dead until then. They found him. And then they cut off his head in verse 9 and stripped off his armor and sent word all around to the land of the Philistines to declare the good news in the house of their idols and to their people. And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth, which we believe is a temple in this city that we've been talking about at Bethshan. And they nailed his body to the wall in Bethshan. So that's where that was done. And when now we're going to see another very interesting part as we wrap up this stuff for the evening. They nailed his body to this wall, and I just showed you the picture of that, and I'll go back to that just quickly. And if you just bear with me here, and I'll show you this first picture again. So this is Bethshan up here. So this is the original Bethshan, the Tel Bethshan, and this is the other city that was built later that we talked about. And so this would have happened up here. So on the top of this mountain, there would have been a wall around the city. And somewhere on that wall, he was nailed to disgrace him, to humiliate Israel. And that's what was done. But we've got a very interesting thing here. It says, now when the inhabitants, in verse 11, now when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men, these are kind of, you've heard about David, King David's valiant men. We just talked the other day, last Sunday, I think it was, that I think 3 of them went through the enemy lines to go to Bethlehem to bring back water from a spring there for King David, who they loved and respected. They were valiant men who risked their lives. Well, these valiant men did something very similar. They rose and went all night. They went back through this Philistine, very dangerous country, and they went up and they took the body of Saul off the wall and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan. And they came to Jabesh. This is Jabesh Gilead. That's where they're from. And they burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under a tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted for 7 days. So you just kind of scratch your head and think, my gosh, why would these people do that? Why would they risk their lives? You know, these men were dead. You know, they were dead, but yet they risked their lives. But so to understand why, we're going to look at the last, this will be the last area of scripture we're going to go to tonight. You're going to, if you'll turn to 1 Samuel, we'll go back and take a look at that in 1 Samuel chapter 11. So we're in Samuel now already. So we're going to go back to chapter 11 to get some background here, why these guys would risk their lives, because that's kind of an interesting thing. And so why did they do it? So in verse 1, now this is going to be some history about Jabesh Gilead. When Nahash, the Amorite, came up and encamped against Jabesh Gilead, all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, cut a covenant with us and we will serve you. So we've got these people of Jabesh wanting to cut a covenant because these guys were pretty intense guys and they wanted to not, they wanted to have a covenant. Verse 2, Nahash the Amorite said to them, on this condition, I'll cut a covenant with you, that all of your right eyes be gouged out, so I will bring disgrace upon Israel. So, so that's how you're going to cut a covenant. And it's interesting, the right eye. In warfare, you held the shield with your left hand and the spear with your right hand. So if your right eye was blinded, you had to move the shield away from your body so your left eye could see where you're going to throw the spear. And that made you very vulnerable, took away any advantage in warfare. And the elders, let alone the difficulty with having only, having your eye gouged out. The elders of Jabesh said to him, give us 7 days that we may send messengers through all the territory of Israel. And then if there is no one to save us, then we'll come out to you. And when the messengers came to Gilbeth, when Saul heard about it and spoke those words in the ears of the people, then all the people lifted up their voice and wept. And behold, Saul came out of the field behind the oxen. He was feeling. This is the first year of King Saul's kingship. He's behind these oxen, and Saul said, what is wrong with the people that they are crying? And then he told them the words of the men of Jabesh. And the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul. And you'll see this in other records in the Word. When he heard those words, his anger burned exceedingly. And he took a yoke of oxen, cut them in pieces, sent them throughout all the territory of Israel by the hand of messengers, saying, whoever does not come out to follow Saul and follow Samuel, so will it be done to his oxen. And the terror of Yahweh fell on the people, and they came out as one man. So he's getting Israel together because he is upset about what's going on. God is upset. God rushed upon Saul and anger burned. He didn't want this to happen to these men in Jabesh. And verse 8, and he counted them in Bezek, and the children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. And they said to the messengers who came, say this to the men of Jabesh Gilead, tomorrow by this time the sun is hot, you will have deliverance. And the messengers came and told the men of Jabesh, and they rejoiced. So the men of Jabesh said, tomorrow we will come out to you, and you can do with us whatever seems good to you. And the next day, Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the camp in the morning and watched and struck the Amorites until the heat of the day. Those who survived were scattered so that no 2 of them were left together. So that's why they did that. That's why they did it. Their love and their commitment to Saul for what he had done 40 years before. Saul reigned for 40 years, and in the first year of his reign, he did that wonderful thing to protect those men. Spirit of God moved on him. He took a stand, and they did not forget. And I think that is just a wonderful character for people to do stuff like that when you love people and you take a stand for people, and then they honor you by remembering what you did. And King Saul's life was a mess at the end, but as far as they're concerned, they honored him. And so they took down his body, they risked their lives to do it, and they brought him back to their city. And that's where they burned his body, respectfully burned his body, and buried his bones. So that's the record. That's the backstory, and with details about Beth Shan there in Israel. It was a great place to be, and a great place to visit, and a wonderful time to remember the goodness of God and the goodness of people that love God and are thankful. And we learned some of the things that what not to be, some of the mistakes that King Saul made that are good example for us to apply today. So it's been a pleasure sharing that with you, and I'll close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for your goodness, your love, your blessing on your word. Thank you that it's alive and real today, that it heals us and it teaches us the things that pertain to life and godliness. It never goes out of date, out of style. It never is voided because the years have passed by. These things are living and real and true, and are a blessing for us to know and understand and sink our hearts into. Thank you for this group tonight. I ask you to bless them all. I know it's getting to bedtime on the East Coast, and people in Eastern time and even Central time. For everybody just having a wonderful sleep tonight, we ask you that our brother Brad did well at the hospital, and he gets back home and gets to sleep and gets to have a good night. And everybody else who has any physical needs, we lift up to you. Protect us, and we thank you for your love. Thank you for this evening together. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
Oh, yes.